Welcome to Chapter 6. If you notice, I'm actually breaking this up into two different parts, one this week, one next week. That's because this is such a critical skill for students to learn. Being in high school is very different from college. You are expected to be a self-starter in college, what we call an independent learner. That means you're not relying on us to learn. You have to learn on your own. If you haven't noticed already, college professors will give you topics, will give you an assignment, but we're not going to hold your hand through it. It's very much a sort of at will. Do you have the will? Do you have the determination to get things done? Time management, we're going to talk about here soon. A lot of these skills that you have to have, because in college, we consider you're an adult. You have decided to come to college, and because of that decision, it is your responsibility to make sure that you're doing all the things you can do. We're not treating you like a kid anymore. That was high school, that was middle school. Now you're an adult. So let's talk Chapter 6. One of the biggest things I can tell you about memory is it sort of, in some ways, works like a computer. Once you have memorized something, once you have stored it, it is always going to be there. The problem is we sometimes forget how to retrieve it. In fact, studies have shown that we never forget anything that has been learned by us. But we forget how to get there. We forget where we've stored it. Have you ever saved a computer file and then you have no earthly idea where it went inside that computer, but it's just gone? The same sort of thing. Can it be found? Can it be retrieved? Yes, but it takes some effort. I really want to point out this figure 6.1 over here. We use our senses when we're talking about learning and memorizing. And what you want to do is take things from short-term to long-term memory. Short-term memory is remembering the 3 things that you need to go get at the grocery store. Long-term memory is what you need to pass a test, to take the class after the one you're taking now and still remember the content and build on it. The more senses, and that's what it's talking about, sensory perception up here, the more of your 5 senses, smell, touch, hearing, tasting, which one did I forget? Touching. The more senses that you can use to learn and memorize content, the more deeply it's going to be embedded, and it's going to be creating a path for retrieval. Creating that path is what takes effort. Think about this. If you, as a kid, did you go maybe over to your neighbors, and usually you didn't take 2 or 3 or 4 routes to get there, you crossed one way. And the more you went that one way, the more your footsteps kind of created a path maybe through the grass. And if you went over it enough times, maybe the grass died and you could actually see, that dirty path where you've created a memory. You've created a memory in the grass and on the lawn. Here we're trying to create that same path by going over and over. That's why we say read your textbook, because that's the first laying down of memory. The first time you hear something should not be during a lecture in class. The first time you listen to it, to hear it, should be when you're doing your reading. So then it's not a new concept that your brain is trying to scramble and figure out how to organize and store. You can say, oh yeah, I remember, I read this, here's what I already know, and then you build that pathway from there. The more senses that you use, the stronger the pathway. The more times that you go over that information, the more deeply embedded that pathway becomes. So, how do we use our senses to learn and to study? One of the things I do, yes, reading, so that's sight. Reading out loud is hearing. And in fact, one of the strategies that I used to use personally is I would take my notes or my textbook and read the important parts into a recorder. These days, it's your phone. Most phones have a voice memo area. Then, when I was commuting to grad school, I had an hour commute, I would play those notes instead of listening to my favorite music. I made that into a study session. So then again, that's hearing. The more senses that you use. Some folks even say, eat the same candy or chew the same flavored gum when you're studying a certain subject. And then when you go to take the test or the big assignment for that class, chew or eat that same flavor. And that will spike a memory sensation so you can retrieve that information. It's just a layered effect. So give that a try. Peppermint for math. Orange candy or orange gum maybe for English. Whatever you want to do. But remember, the more senses you use. Rewrite your notes. The first time you take your notes, that's touching. You're physically using that pen and being tactile and using that sense to write those notes. Recopy your notes later further embeds it into you. So I hope you can learn a few things from that. Now it is really important to, as this section over here shows, to take notes while you're in class. The one thing I have seen more and more from college students is, number one, you don't want to read, so you don't read the textbook. So that's already putting one strike against you on learning, because your brain's having to scramble when you hear the instructor talking about it instead of already knowing something about the subject. The second thing is they don't take notes. They want to sit there. Note taking does two things. It's an active process. It tells your body and it tells your brain, hey, this is something that I need to pay attention to. It's also okay to record lectures. Just ask your professor for permission, but most are going to say yes. So you're getting ready to take notes, possibly you're recording your lecture, and this is why it's important. 95% of typically what shows up in tests is something that has been said in the class. That's also the reason you go to class. Most of the material is going to be presented there. But that still means that there's a percentage that's out there that's in the textbook, so you do have to read. I even say take notes as you are reading your textbook. Okay, these are important points. Here's what I want to remember. Leave white space. Skip lines between things so you have time. So if you've read it and you think this might be important from reading the textbook, then somebody brings it up in class, you leave the white space there so you can go and add your professor notes right there with your textbook notes. So everything is there for you. It's compact. Now let's also talk about highlighters. Highlighters are great. I use them personally when I'm reading and I want to pick out different parts, but don't make it a coloring book. Use highlighting very strategically, because if you highlight a bunch of things, all of a sudden, what's important? You can't even tell because so much has been highlighted. So just use that very sparingly, but it is a very, very good tool. Another thing I want to talk about is this post-lecture strategy. I don't know if I've talked about this before, but we really, really hate it when you're in an in-person class and the last 5 minutes you're packing up all your books and you're not listening to a thing we say. Not a good thing. And it's not good for your learning. Listen until the end. Number one, if nothing else, it's polite. But why would something that we say at the end of class be any less important than the things we might say at the beginning or in the middle? I've even known some professors to become so upset about this that they'll give away test questions and all kinds of things that last few minutes of lecture if everybody starts packing up. And in fact, we had talked about this in class one day, and my student comes in the next day and goes, guess what? Everybody was packing up. The teacher reached down, she pulled out the test, started reading test questions. She said, I was the only person in the entire class that was writing down test questions. And the teacher saw me later and said, keep it to yourself. So these are all good things to know. So make sure, all the way to the end of class. The other thing you want to do at the end of class, you want to glance down at your notes. Don't pack up. We are a very small campus at BCTC. You have 15 minutes between classes. You have 2 minutes before you leave to look at your notes. First off, are they readable? Do you have any questions you might need to ask the professor? And the reason I say that one is because sometimes we don't remember exactly how we've said something the next class. So ask us then. That's when we're going to have it fresh in our mind and we can give you the best answer. The other thing is make sure you can read it. Not only physically can you read the writing, but also do you understand the way you took the notes? Because if not, you stop and you fix it then. Because I guarantee you, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, however many weeks forward, when you're going to study for a test, you're definitely not going to remember what the heck you meant then. So just make sure everything is readable at that point. You're going to have assignment about different types of note-taking. And Corel is one that I've had several students learn and love to use. And a lot of times we haven't been introduced, or no one's ever taught us about how to take notes, different ways and different approaches. So this is one that a lot of students will like and get to know. Reading and retaining information, like I've told you guys before, is not just like reading a novel. It's a different concept. So look at some of these strategies that you can do to prepare yourself before you even really start reading your chapter or reading what's going on. All right, well, I'm going to wrap this up for now. But if you have any questions, let me know. And like I said, we are going to do part 2 of this chapter next week.